Okay, how's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, so in this episode, I thought I'd try to say something about, something about the title of this episode, namely, that only humans die. Now, only humans? What the heck is that all about? That just, doesn't seem right. I mean, don't all living things die? Well, not quite. At least according to the philosophers Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Martin Heidegger and Miguel de Unamuno. Okay, so let's take Heidegger first. So Heidegger doesn't deny that the lives of animals and plants don't come to an end. Of course they do. After all, their lives are finite. But yet still, what he says is that only humans can die. So obviously for him, dying must mean something else besides just having a life come to an end. And it does. What dying means for him is something like to be capable of death as death. That's to say, only we humans, he seems to think, have the ability of living with a sense of our own finitude. In other words, we're aware of leading lives bounded by stages, by a narrative that terminates in decline, you might say. Now, of course, other animals also pass through stages. But according to Heidegger, they're not aware of these stages as different ones standing in relation to others. I don't know, maybe another way of putting this is that unlike us humans, animals live almost entirely in the present. They live, let's say, without a longing for a totally different way to exist or for another stage to move into. So for Heidegger, it seems that we humans are unique insofar as we have this particular relationship to time. That the parts of our lives are obvious to us as parts reveals the temporal character of human existence. And that's why, as opposed to everything else that lives, only we can die. Okay, well, so what about Rousseau? Well, you know what? He says something similar, at least in part. So, according to Rousseau, animals don't die. Or more precisely, animals don't know what it is to die. They're not capable of such a conception. You see, for Rousseau, what an awareness and a fear of death requires is a movement out of what he called a state of nature, by which he meant a sort of prehistorical time before people existed in societies. And this is because in the state of nature, there's very little that distinguishes human from animal. Neither one has the self-consciousness or the self-awareness that would make the conception and the fear of death possible. And actually, that's why, for Rousseau, life in the state of nature was much more enjoyable for us than it is now. It's because we were living at the level of the unconscious animal. And so we weren't overwhelmed by the terror of death. It's only when civilized that we begin to think of death and fear it. And this causes all sorts of problems for us, Rousseau thinks. And that's because now aware of death and of course afraid of it, we do all sorts of things to try to forestall it or deny it. For example, we pursue power in order to try to guard ourselves against it. Or we invent religions to try to provide us with, well, another life. But for him, for Rousseau, all such things poison our consciousness and ultimately bring nothing but misery and worry in their wake. No, better to live in a state not fully knowing death. Actually, no, this is why the former wild man, Enkidu, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, experienced so much fear when he was dying. It's because he left the state of nature and became civilized. Had he never left the state of nature, there would have been no anxiety. And that's because, again, animals don't die, only humans do. Okay, well, so the last thinker I wanted to say something about on this topic is, as I mentioned earlier, Unamuno. So suffice it to say, Unamuno also finds consciousness quite problematic. What he tells us is that we've paid a pretty heavy price for it, for becoming a conscious animal, that most central feature about us. Now, what is that price? Well, for him, it's that ultimately we experience life as tragic. In this sense, he thinks consciousness is actually really like a kind of disease or an affliction. A disease that other forms of life, like like crabs and donkeys, are forever free from. Well, okay, so why does he think this exactly? What's going on here? Well, it's really not that difficult to understand. What consciousness does is it gives us the capacity for self-reflection, and it places us in time. But by doing so, by launching us into the temporal realm, we're now confronted by the toxic knowledge of our finitude. And so with, as Ecclesiastes tells us, with the vanity of our existence. So this is why Unamuno calls consciousness a disease. Because it's precisely this, the consequence of having eaten from the tree of knowledge that now reveals to us that everything is ephemeral and that we die. So for Unamuno then, the basic idea is that human consciousness has a temporal element that of other animals seems to lack. A lack which relieves, like I mentioned, crabs and donkeys from the sorts of anxious afflictions that we humans suffer from because of the recognition of our finitude. And so again, that's why only humans can die. Bye for now.